The rain drummed endlessly against the glass walls of Hartsfield-Jackson Airport, the kind of relentless southern downpour that turned the city of Atlanta into a mirror of flashing lights and reflections. The terminal buzzed with weary travelers echoing footsteps, the hiss of suitcase wheels on tile floors. But for Annie Martin, the world had narrowed to the tiny screen of her phone and the single message that had shattered her night. Your mother collapsed. They've admitted her to Northwestern Memorial in Chicago. It doesn't look good. The words pulsed behind her eyes, colder than the rain outside. She stood in her worn work uniform from the Peach Diner, the faint scent of coffee and fried food still clinging to her. Her bun was messy strands of dark curls slipping loose around her face. Her eyes, warm brown, but rimmed red, betrayed a week's worth of double shifts. Her hands shook slightly as she gripped the boarding pass she'd bought with money borrowed from her next-door neighbor, a favor she wasn't sure she'd ever repay. Behind her, a small voice broke through the noise. "Mommy, you don't have to go, right?" Jaden, 6 years old, clutching his faded Spider-Man backpack, looked up at her with the kind of innocence that made her heart crack. His tiny fingers curled around the hem of her jacket, desperate. Annie knelt, forcing a smile that didn't reach her tired eyes. "Hey, buddy. Grandma's sick. Remember, Mommy just has to see her for a few days." He sniffled. "Then you'll bring me something back." "A surprise." "Of course," she whispered, touching his cheek. "Something special from Chicago. Maybe a snow globe." Jaden nodded, his little chin trembling. He didn't notice that her hands were shaking as she zipped up his jacket. He didn't see the worry hiding behind her forced calm. He only felt her warmth, her familiar scent, the way she held him a second too long, like she wasn't sure when she'd hold him again. She kissed the crown of his head, murmuring into his hair. "Be good for Mrs. Evans, okay? And don't stay up late." "I'll try." His voice wavered, too brave for his years. When she finally stood, it felt like tearing herself in half. The loudspeaker announced final boarding for Flight 472 to Chicago, and she forced her legs to move, leaving Jaden standing by the window with his sitter. His small hand lifted in a wave as she disappeared past security. By the time Annie reached her gate, her chest felt hollow, her heart a stone she carried too long. The airport lights were harsh, unforgiving. The rain streaked across the glass, turning the runway into a blur of liquid silver. She clutched her worn leather bag, the strap frayed from years of use, and inhaled deeply, trying to keep herself from breaking. When they called her row, she moved like a ghost, half present, half sinking into exhaustion. Inside the plane, the air smelled of recycled oxygen and cold metal. Her seat, 14B. And beside her in 14A, sat a man who looked like he didn't belong in economy class at all. He wore a tailored black suit that fit him too perfectly, the kind that cost more than her monthly rent. His posture was effortless, his attention buried in a stack of neatly bound reports. The glow from the reading light carved lines of focus across his face. Sharp jaw, calm, confidence, a kind of quiet power that didn't need to be announced. When Annie lifted her carry-on, struggling to wedge it into the overhead bin, he glanced up. His eyes gray-green like storm clouds, before lightning met hers for half a second before he stood. "Let me," he said simply. She blinked, caught off guard. "Oh no, I can..." He reached up anyway, easily, sliding her bag into place. His movements smooth, practiced. "Thank you." She managed awkwardly, brushing a loose curl behind her ear. He gave a faint, almost amused smile. "Don't thank me yet. I just didn't want the line to stall." The corner of her mouth lifted, despite herself. "So you're the efficient type?" "Something like that." He closed the bin with a click, settling back into his seat, eyes already dropping to his papers again. Annie exhaled quietly and took her seat beside him, clutching the frayed strap of her handbag. The hum of the cabin filled the silence. As the plane began to taxi, she stared out the window at the sheets of rain streaking down the glass. Atlanta faded into a wash of light. Her body screamed for rest, but her mind kept replaying her mother's voice, strong, laughing, alive, and the fear that maybe she'd never hear it again. When the wheels lifted off the ground, she gripped the armrest. The man beside her noticed, but said nothing. His hand hovered near hers for a heartbeat, as if he might offer comfort, but then he drew it back. 10 minutes later, exhaustion finally won. Her head drifted toward him, the soft scent of his cologne mixing with the faint smell of rain still clinging to her hair. When she realized what was happening, she tried to straighten, but her eyelids were too heavy, her body too worn. She didn't see the way Henry Green glanced at her, how the hardness in his gaze softened just a fraction. She didn't see his faint smile when she finally gave in and leaned against his shoulder. He looked down at her for a long moment, the woman in a cheap diner uniform clutching a ticket she'd probably sacrificed everything to buy. The world saw another exhausted stranger, but for some reason he couldn't explain, he saw something else entirely. Outside, lightning flashed over the clouds, illuminating the curve of her face against his arm. He turned his eyes back to the dark window, but the reflection staring back wasn't the usual unshakable man he knew. Something about her, the fragility, the quiet fight in her breathing, pulled at a corner of his guarded heart he thought had long gone numb. The engines roared louder as the plane climbed above the storm, slicing through clouds like a promise, trying to break free from chaos. Annie stirred slightly but didn't wake, and Henry adjusted just enough so her head could rest more comfortably against him. He should have been reviewing the merger files on his tablet, thinking about profits negotiations and tomorrow's board meeting. Instead, he found himself memorizing the faint curve of her lips, the small scar near her wrist, the way her shoulders relaxed only when she finally surrendered to sleep. The man who had spent his life controlling every variable in his world sat there motionless, letting a stranger sleep on his shoulder while rain painted the windows and thunder faded behind them. By the time the plane broke through the storm, Atlanta was miles below, and the night sky stretched wide, clear, and endless. Henry looked once more at the woman beside him and almost involuntarily smiled. "Sleep, sweetheart," he murmured under his breath, so softly she'd never hear. "You look like you fought too long." The lights dimmed. The storm was gone. And somewhere between the clouds and the city lights, two lives worlds apart had just crossed for the first time. If you've ever believed that kindness can find you in the unlikeliest places, share this story with someone who might need a little hope tonight. Sometimes all it takes is one small moment a stranger's shoulder to change everything. For a moment, Annie couldn't tell where she was. The low hum of the engines, the soft vibration under her cheek, the faint warmth beside her, it all blurred together until a quiet, deep voice shattered the illusion. "You're awake." Her eyes fluttered open. The first thing she saw was fabric black smooth and faintly scented of cedar and rain. Then she realized with a jolt of horror that the fabric was attached to the man sitting beside her. The same man whose shoulder she had apparently been using as a pillow for God knew how long. She shot upright, mortified. "Oh my God, I am so sorry, I didn't mean to." The man. Henry turned slightly, his expression calm, almost amused. "Don't worry about it. I must have dozed off. I didn't mean to." "You slept," he said, his voice low but steady. "It happens, and you slept well." It's been a while since anyone trusted me enough to do that. Annie froze. There was something about the way he said it, simple but threaded with an unexpected softness. It didn't fit the man she'd glimpsed before takeoff, all sharp edges and quiet control. Still, she muttered, rubbing the back of her neck. You probably didn't sign up to be a pillow tonight. A corner of his mouth curved upward. I've dealt with worse. The tension in her chest loosened just a bit. She glanced around the dim cabin, the passengers half asleep, the lights low, the night outside, black and endless. Somehow the world felt suspended in that quiet moment between them. To break the silence, she asked, "Do you fly a lot?" "Too much." "For work?" "Yes." He closed the folder on his lap, resting it neatly on the tray. "Investment meetings, boardrooms, the occasional charity gala that I can't escape. It's all very thrilling." His tone was dry, self-deprecating. "What do you do exactly?" She pressed, curious now. Henry hesitated for the briefest moment before answering. "Green energy. I fund startups that build cleaner systems, solar grids, wind turbines, sustainable housing, trying to keep the planet alive a bit longer." Annie blinked, surprised. "That actually sounds good." He looked at her, one eyebrow raised. "You sound surprised. I just didn't expect a guy in a $3,000 suit to be saving the planet," she teased, before she could stop herself. A flicker of amusement crossed his face. Something lighter, easier. "You have a good eye." "For what?" "For suits. And people." She gave a short laugh. "You'd be disappointed then. My track record with people isn't great." "Still," he murmured, "you strike me as someone who keeps trying anyway." That silenced her. How could a man she'd just met see through her so easily? She turned toward the window, pretending to study the city lights blinking faintly below. For a few long minutes, neither of them spoke. The hum of the engines filled the space. Annie thought about her son Jaden, probably asleep by now, clutching that tattered Spider-Man blanket, and about her mother lying in a sterile hospital room hundreds of miles away. She hadn't realized she was trembling until Henry spoke again. "You're worried about someone." Annie exhaled softly. "My mom. She had a stroke. They don't know if she's going to make it." He didn't offer empty comfort. He just said quietly, "I'm sorry." The words were so simple, so sincere, they almost undid her. "I left my little boy in Atlanta," she said after a moment. "He's 6. I didn't even have the money for the ticket. My neighbor loaned me enough to fly standby. I don't even know how I'll pay her back." Henry watched her in silence, his eyes unreadable. "You're doing what you have to do," he said at last. "That counts for something." Before she could respond, the plane suddenly lurched. A wave of gasps rippled through the cabin as the overhead lights flickered. Annie's heart jumped into her throat. Turbulence. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The plane rocked again, harder this time. Annie gripped the armrest's knuckles white. Henry reached over, covering her hand with his. His palm was steady, warm. "Hey," he said quietly. "It's just air pockets. Breathe." Her breath hitched. She tried to inhale, to focus on the sound of his voice instead of the chaos outside. "See," he murmured. "You're fine. You're safe." For some reason, she believed him. The turbulence eased after a few minutes, but his hand stayed where it was covering hers. When he finally withdrew it, she felt the ghost of his touch lingering, calming her in a way she didn't understand. The rest of the flight passed in an oddly peaceful silence. Every so often she'd glance at him, his profile lit by the faint glow of the overhead light, his expression composed, but distant, as if his mind was elsewhere. There was something about him that didn't fit neatly into the image of a businessman. Something quieter, lonelier. As the captain announced their descent into Chicago, Annie began gathering her things. She turned to him with an awkward smile. "Thank you for, not freaking out when I drooled on your suit." Henry chuckled softly. "You didn't. But if you had, I'd consider it an investment in character." She rolled her eyes. "You're full of one-liners, aren't you? Occupational hazard." The seatbelt light blinked on. The plane began its slow glide toward the lights of the city, and for a brief moment everything outside looked unreal, like constellations scattered across the earth instead of the sky. When the wheels touched down, the cabin erupted in motion, people standing too early, phones turning on, voices rising. Annie waited, watching the man beside her slide a sleek black notebook into his briefcase. He turned to her. "It was nice meeting you, Annie." She blinked. "How did you—" "Your boarding pass," he said simply. "It fell earlier. I picked it up." She stared at him, caught between embarrassment and surprise. "Right. Of course." He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her a business card. Thick, ivory, expensive looking. Henry Green, Green Holdings, Chicago, Illinois. Underneath a single line, Sustainable Futures, Real Impact. Annie's eyes widened. She looked up at him. "Wait, you're that Henry Green? As in the one on Forbes?" He smiled faintly, almost apologetically. "So they tell me." Her mouth fell open. "You sat in economy class. I prefer quiet." She laughed softly. "You don't strike me as the quiet type." He shrugged, the ghost of amusement still playing at the corner of his mouth. "You'd be surprised." The line of passengers began to move. Henry stood first, retrieving her bag from the overhead compartment before she could reach for it. He handed it to her, his hand brushing hers in the process, just enough to make her heart stumble. "Thank you," she said again, her voice softer this time. "Take care, Annie." She hesitated before replying. "You too, Mr. Green." He smiled, something unspoken flickering behind his eyes. "Henry's fine." When they finally stepped off the plane, she turned left toward the terminal, and he turned right toward the private gate. But as Annie walked down the jet bridge, she couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on her, watching her disappear into the crowd. And Henry, standing still among the stream of travelers, found himself doing something completely uncharacteristic. He lingered. He didn't know why. He only knew that for the first time in years, he was curious about someone who had nothing to do with his world. The automatic doors hissed open, and a gust of antiseptic air hit Annie like a wall. Hospitals always smelled the same, too clean, too bright, too full of ghosts, pretending not to be there. The harsh fluorescence above her felt merciless, exposing every bruise beneath her tired eyes. She gripped the strap of her worn leather bag tighter, her knees weak from the long night of travel. Martin Annie, the nurse at the reception, called, glancing at a clipboard. "Your mother's in ICU room 214. She's stable for now, but the stroke was severe. The doctor will brief you soon." Stable. The word was supposed to bring comfort, but it felt like a coin flipped in the dark. Annie's throat burned as she nodded and made her way down the corridor. The hallway stretched long and silent, the kind of silence that amplifies everything, every beep, every whispered prayer, every unseen goodbye. When she reached room 214, she froze at the door. Her mother, the woman who once moved through life like a storm of laughter and determination, now lay still beneath white sheets. Her face was pale, her breathing shallow, and the tubes and monitors wrapped around her looked almost cruel. "Mom," Annie whispered, stepping closer. Her voice cracked halfway through the word. She sat down by the bed, trembling as she reached for her mother's hand. It was warm, thank God, but limp. I made it, she said softly, as if her mother could hear her through the haze. You scared me. There was no response, only the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, that fragile little sound fighting back against the silence. A nurse came in to adjust the IV drip. She might not be responsive yet, the woman said kindly, but people in her condition can often still hear. Talk to her, it helps. So Annie did. She talked about Jaden, about how he'd started reading on his own, about how he refused to eat broccoli no matter what she did. She told her mother about the flight, the turbulence, the stranger who'd helped her with her bag. She told her everything, except how scared she really was. By evening, the sky over Chicago turned a deep, bruised blue. Annie hadn't eaten, hadn't slept. Her stomach twisted with hunger, but the thought of food made her nauseous. She just sat there watching her mother's chest rise and fall, counting every breath, as if her attention alone could keep her alive. Around 9, her mother stirred. Her lips parted dry and pale, and for a moment, Annie thought it was just a reflex, until she heard the faintest rasp of her voice. Annie. Her heart leapt. Mom, I'm here. I'm right here. Her mother's eyes opened, a sliver unfocused, but alive. You look tired. A tear slipped down Annie's cheek. You always said that. I'm fine, Mom. Her mother's fingers twitched weakly against hers. You have to promise me something. Anything. Don't stop fighting, no matter how hard it gets. Annie pressed her lips together, choking back a sob. I won't. I promise. Her mother smiled faintly, a shadow of her old grin. Good girl. Then her eyes fluttered closed again, sinking back into the rhythm of the machines. The tears came silently. Annie leaned forward, resting her forehead on her mother's hand, letting the exhaustion wash over her until her body felt too heavy to move. Hours passed. At some point, the nurses dimmed the lights, and the world shrank to the hum of machines and the faint buzz of the vending machine down the hall. Annie stepped outside, her legs barely cooperating. The waiting area was nearly empty, just a few people slumped in chairs. The lonely hum of a soda machine, a muted TV replaying the day's news. She sank into one of the plastic chairs, the kind that made your back ache almost instantly. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, startling her. A text from an unknown number. Unknown. Did you make it there safely? Henry. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected to hear from him again. Not the man from the plane, not the billionaire, who had probably already forgotten her name. She hesitated before typing back. Annie. Yes, I'm at the hospital. My mom's still critical. The reply came almost instantly. Henry. Have you eaten? She frowned at the screen. Who asks that, Annie? No. I'm fine. It's late. There was a pause. Then another message appeared. Henry. What hospital? She blinked. Why would he need to know that Annie Northwestern Memorial? Why no response for several minutes? She set the phone down, assuming that was the end of it. Maybe he was just being polite. Maybe he had 100 assistants texting people like her out of courtesy. But 30 minutes later, a nurse approached. Miss Martin. Annie looked up, startled. There's a delivery for you. The nurse handed her a white paper bag, the name of an upscale cafe, printed across the front. Inside, neatly wrapped sandwiches, a thermos of soup still warm to the touch, and a folded note on expensive stationery. Annie's hands trembled slightly as she opened it. The handwriting was clean, precise. Eat. Even the strong need care sometimes. H. For a long time, she just stared at the words. The noise of the hospital faded away. The beeps, the shuffling feet, the hollow announcements, all of it drowned, beneath the strange, unexpected warmth spreading through her chest. It wasn't about the food. It wasn't even about the gesture. It was the simple fact that someone somewhere had noticed her. Someone who didn't owe her anything. She pulled out the container, the aroma of fresh tomato soup rising like a small kindness in the sterile air. As she took her first sip, the heat made her eyes sting again, but this time, not from sadness. Outside the window, snow began to fall, thin, hesitant flakes that clung to the glass before melting away. The city lights blurred behind them, soft and distant, like something out of a memory she didn't know she was keeping. Annie sat there, wrapped in the low hum of the hospital night, the soup warming her hands, the note pressed between her fingers. For years, she had carried everything alone, every bill, every broken promise, every sleepless night. But tonight, for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely invisible. She looked at the note again, whispering to no one, "Thank you, Henry." And though she couldn't see him somewhere across the city, a man sat in a hotel suite overlooking Lake Michigan, phone still in hand, eyes fixed on the same message thread. Neither of them knew what this was yet. But something had shifted quietly, impossibly, like the first hint of dawn, breaking through a long, unforgiving night. The call came just after sunrise, when the hospital halls were quiet, and the city outside was still caught between night and morning. Annie sat on a worn bench near the window, sipping cold coffee from a paper cup, her eyes fixed on the soft pulse of the heart monitor through the half-open door. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. Again. She hesitated before answering. "Hello." A pause, then that familiar low, calm voice, smooth as dark espresso and twice as steady. "Good morning, Annie." Her breath caught before she could help it. "Henry, I didn't wake you, did I?" "No," she said, glancing at her mother's room. "I've been awake since, well, forever." "I thought so," he replied, a quiet amusement in his tone. "You sound like someone who hasn't seen a sunrise in peace for a long time." Annie frowned, not sure if she wanted to laugh or sigh. "That's a strange observation for 7 in the morning." "It's an invitation," he said. "I'd like to talk. Join me for breakfast." She almost laughed. "Breakfast? I'm in a hospital. Then you deserve a real meal." There was something about the way he said it, steady, unhurried, leaving no room for her usual defenses, that made it impossible to refuse. Against every practical thought, screaming in her head, she heard herself say, "Where Lakeshore Cafe?" 8 o'clock. It's by the water, you'll find it. And then he hung up. By the time Annie stepped into the cafe near Lake Michigan, the city had shaken off its sleep. The lake shimmered beyond the glass walls, steel blue under a pale morning sun. Inside, the hum of soft jazz mingled with the scent of roasted beans and buttered pastries. She felt wildly out of place. Her thrift store jacket still smelled faintly of antiseptic, her eyes shadowed from nights without rest. Henry was already there, seated by the window. He looked different in daylight, less severe, more human somehow. His tie was undone, his sleeves rolled, his hair slightly disheveled, in a way that made him seem less like a CEO and more like someone trying just for one morning to belong in the real world. When he saw her, he stood. "You came. I almost didn't. But you did." He smiled slightly, gesturing to the seat across from him. "That's what matters." She sat, uncertain. The waitress approached, and before Annie could open her mouth, Henry ordered for both of them, black coffee for him, latte, and French toast for her. She raised an eyebrow. "You always decide for people only when they look like they haven't eaten in days." That made her laugh despite herself. "You really don't quit, do you?" "Not when something or someone interests me." Her smile faltered. Why me, Henry? You don't even know me. He leaned back slightly, studying her. You'd be surprised how much you can learn from one flight. Silence fell between them, warm but charged. The sunlight caught in his eyes, a green-gray storm softened by something unspoken. Then he broke it. What did you used to dream about, Annie? She blinked. Dream, yes, he said simply. Before life made you forget. The question hit harder than she expected. She looked away out toward the lake where the light rippled against the waves. I wanted to write, she said quietly. Stories, articles, maybe even a book someday. I used to stay up all night writing when I was younger. What happened? She gave a small, bitter smile. Reality. I got pregnant. Had to drop out. Worked whatever job I could find. Dreams don't pay rent. Henry's gaze didn't waver. Maybe not then, but they can now. She frowned. What do you mean? He leaned forward, elbows on the table. Let me help you get that dream back. Her chest tightened. Henry, don't say impossible. He interrupted, his tone gentle but firm. You've spent too long surviving. Maybe it's time you start living again. Something in her wanted to believe him. Something else was terrified too. I don't need charity, she said quietly. I don't offer charity. His voice dropped lower, steadier. I offer opportunity. 3 days later, Annie's phone rang again, this time from an unfamiliar name. Gloria Hayes. The voice on the line announced, brisk and unapologetic. Editor-in-Chief, Urban Edge. Mr. Green said I should meet you. Annie blinked. Urban Edge. The magazine. That's the one, Gloria replied. We're short-staffed. But let me be clear. Ms. Martin Henry might sign my paychecks, but I don't hire people out of pity. I hire people who have fire. Do you? Annie hesitated, heart pounding. I think I used to. Then find it again, Gloria said, and hung up. On Monday morning, Annie stood in front of the towering glass building that bore the name Green Tower. The skyscraper cut through Chicago's skyline like a shard of light, reflecting the gray clouds drifting over the river. Inside, marble floors gleamed, and the sound of heels and briefcases filled the air like a heartbeat of ambition. She felt small in her second-hand blazer, her palms damp around her folder. But when she caught her reflection in the polished glass doors, she saw something new in her eyes, resolve. The elevator ride to the 18th floor felt endless. When the doors opened, the newsroom of Urban Edge was a storm of motion phones, ringing editors, shouting across desks, the steady click of keyboards, creating a rhythm that felt alive. Gloria Hayes was waiting near the center arms, crossed, tall and intimidating in her crimson suit. You're the one Henry won't stop talking about, she said, her tone sharp. Let's see if you're worth the disruption. Annie swallowed. I'll work hard, ma'am. Gloria smirked. I don't need hard work. I need heart. Get to it, Assistant Editor Martin. Just like that, Annie Martin's second life began. By afternoon, she was buried in manuscripts, formatting drafts, proofreading headlines. Her head spun from the pace, but there was something exhilarating in it, a forgotten part of her reawakening. In the glass tower across the street on the 20th floor, Henry Green stood by his window, overlooking the city. Through the tinted glass, he could see into the Urban Edge offices. His gaze found her almost instantly seated at her desk, sleeves-rolled eyes alive with concentration. She didn't know he was watching, and yet he couldn't look away. To everyone else, she was just another woman trying to rebuild her life. But to Henry, she was a reminder that sometimes all a soul needs isn't saving just a chance. and watching her beneath the morning sun, surrounded by a skyline he once thought he owned. Henry Green realized something unsettling. For the first time in years, he wanted to believe in something money couldn't buy. The elevator hummed softly as it climbed, the golden numbers glowing one after another, until they stopped at the top Willis Tower, 103rd floor. The doors slid open with a muted chime, and Annie Martin stepped out into a world of glass and city lights. Skyline Grill shimmered before her, a sanctuary of soft jazz and low laughter. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, Chicago glowed beneath a velvet night sky, streets like silver veins, headlights flickering along the river, the city alive and pulsing far below. Annie smoothed the front of her black dress, simple but elegant, borrowed from a consignment store on Michigan Avenue. Her reflection in the glass surprised her. For years, she'd only seen the tired waitress, the overworked single mother, the woman barely keeping afloat. But tonight, she looked different, steadier, softer, like someone who'd remembered how to breathe. Annie. The voice behind her was unmistakable, deep even, and threaded with quiet gravity. She turned. Henry Green stood by the entrance, black suit, tailored to perfection, tie, undone just enough to hint at ease. He wasn't smiling, not fully, but his eyes said everything his words didn't. "You look," he began, then paused, the faintest smirk appearing, different from the diner uniform. She laughed, the sound nervous but genuine. "And you still sound like a man who hasn't learned how to give a compliment." He extended a hand, that rare hint of playfulness curving his lips. "I'll work on it." When their hands touched, a spark, not the lightning kind, but something quieter, more dangerous, passed between them. Dinner unfolded like a slow waltz. The table was set near the window, candles flickering in crystal holders. The waiter poured red wine, and Henry ordered without looking at the menu. 2 steak medallions, roasted potatoes, and a dessert she couldn't pronounce. "You come here often?" she asked, trying to mask the awe in her voice as she glanced around the restaurant filled with people who looked like they'd never worried about rent in their lives. "Only when I need to remember where I started," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "You started at the top of the tallest building in Chicago." A slow smile touched his lips. "Not even close." He leaned back, swirling the wine in his glass. "I grew up south of here, a trailer park near Joliet. My mother worked 2 jobs, night nurse and diner waitress. We used to sit outside the trailer at night and look at the lights of the city from the highway. She'd say, 'That's where the future lives, Henry. Go get it before it forgets you.'" Annie listened, her fork frozen midway. What happened to her? He hesitated, eyes darkening. "She got sick. Cancer. We didn't have insurance. The hospital bills took everything. When she died, I promised myself no one would ever have that kind of power over me again. Not banks, not men in suits, not fate." The candlelight flickered between them, painting shadows across his face, shadows that made him look older, almost fragile for a heartbeat. "I built Green Holdings out of nothing," he continued, voice low. "And for a while, I thought winning meant never bending again." She didn't speak. She just reached for her glass, her fingers trembling slightly. There was a weight to his story, a raw honesty she hadn't expected from a man like him. Finally, she said softly, "Maybe standing tall doesn't mean you never bend. Maybe it just means you learn how to rise again." Henry looked at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. Not the polite corporate kind, but something real deep, warm, and unguarded. "You always do that," he said. "Do what?" "Take something simple," he said, "and make it sound like truth." She smiled faintly. Maybe that's what writers do. Then keep writing, he replied. You never know who's listening. They ate slowly, the conversation flowing easier than either expected. She told him about Jaden, how her son loved dinosaurs and hated bedtime, how he'd built a cardboard spaceship in their living room and declared it off-limits to adults. Henry listened quietly, his expression softening every time she mentioned her boy. When the dessert came, chocolate mousse layered with something golden and sinful, he gestured for her to try it first. Careful, he said. That's how I close most business deals. She rolled her eyes. And here I thought billionaires didn't need tricks. Everyone needs something, he said, tone turning faintly wistful. Even you. He looked at her, then eyes steady, especially me. Across the restaurant, a woman in a crimson dress raised her glass of wine, her gaze sharp as the edge of the glass. Vivian Clark, Vice President of Green Holdings, had been watching since they walked in. Her blonde hair was perfectly set, her lipstick precise, her expression unreadable, except for the faint trace of disdain curling at its edges. She didn't belong to the world of candlelight or laughter. She belonged to the boardroom, cold, immaculate, untouchable. And once she had belonged to Henry, or at least she'd thought she had. When she saw the way he leaned toward Annie, when she caught the flicker of warmth in his eyes, the kind she hadn't seen in years, something inside her twisted. She lifted her phone from the table, hiding it beneath her napkin. Vivian. Find everything you can about Annie Martin. Her assistant's reply came seconds later. How far back do you want me to go? Vivian's lips curved into a thin smile. As far as it takes to ruin her. Back at the table, Annie and Henry were oblivious to the storm beginning to brew just a few feet away. Outside the window, lightning flickered faintly over Lake Michigan, silent and distant. The rain had started again, tracing patterns down the glass, blurring the skyline into watercolor. Funny, Annie said softly, watching the lights blur. Every time I think I'm finally steady, the world shakes again. Henry's gaze lingered on her face. Then maybe you just need someone to stand still beside you. She turned toward him, caught off guard by the sincerity in his tone. For a moment, neither moved. The city vanished, the restaurant disappeared, and the world narrowed to the space between his voice and her heartbeat. Then the waiter arrived with the check, breaking the spell. Henry paid without looking, as if the numbers didn't matter. When they stood, she hesitated, suddenly shy. Thank you for dinner and for everything else. He studied her eyes, unreadable, but warm. It's just dinner, Annie. Maybe for you, she murmured. For me, it's a reminder. Of what? That kindness still exists. He smiled, then small, almost imperceptible, but real. Then I'm glad you came. She walked beside him toward the elevator, her reflection shimmering in the mirrored walls. Somewhere behind them, at that same corner table, Vivian Clark took a slow sip of wine, her eyes never leaving the pair as they disappeared from view. When the elevator doors closed, Vivian's expression hardened. The glass around her reflected her perfectly beautiful, flawless and cold. Let's see who you really are, Annie Martin, she whispered to herself. And as rain whispered against the windows high above Chicago, a quiet war had already begun. The night Chicago decided to dazzle it, overdid it. The city lights burned brighter than the stars, and the wind coming off the river carried the scent of rain and champagne. At the heart of it all, the Art Institute of Chicago gleamed like something out of a dream, its marble steps lined with velvet ropes, its great bronze lions draped in garlands of white lilies for the annual Green Foundation Gala. Annie had never seen anything like it. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. Women in gowns that shimmered like liquid gold brushed past her. Laughter rang out like crystal sharp and rehearsed. Somewhere a string quartet played the kind of music that didn't just fill a room, it announced who belonged there. And Annie Martin did not belong. Not until Henry offered his hand. "Ready?" he asked quietly. She stared at him, nerves fluttering in her stomach. "I don't think I'll ever be ready for something like this." His lips curved. "Good. People who are always ready for nights like this usually forget how to feel them." He extended his arm, and she took it. The warmth of his touch grounded her. As they stepped through the grand entrance together, the murmur of the crowd rippled like a wave. Heads turned, conversations faltered. "Is that Henry Green?" someone whispered. "And who's with him?" Another voice followed. Henry, of course, didn't notice or pretended not to. He moved with effortless poise, the kind of confidence that came from years of owning rooms like this. But Annie could feel every pair of eyes on her, measuring, judging, wondering how a woman like her had ended up beside a man like him. "Relax," he murmured, sensing her unease. "They're just curious. They always are." "That's easy for you to say," she whispered back. "You're the reason they're staring." He glanced at her, and for a fleeting moment, his eyes softened. Not tonight. The gala was a storm of glittering excess crystal chandeliers, champagne towers, conversations that sparkled and cut in equal measure. Annie stood beside Henry, as donors, politicians, and CEOs greeted him like a monarch, their smiles polite, their curiosity thinly veiled. She tried to keep up smiling when she needed to, laughing when she was supposed to, until a familiar hush spread through the room. From across the marble floor, a woman in crimson entered a vision of sharp beauty and colder intent. Vivian Clark. Her presence sliced through the crowd like a blade. The low neckline of her gown gleamed under the chandelier, her diamond earrings flashing like warning lights. She held her champagne flute like it was a weapon. "Henry," she said, her voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. Henry's jaw tensed. "Vivian." "It's been a while," she purred, stepping closer. Her eyes flicked toward Annie with deliberate slowness. "You haven't changed." Henry's expression didn't move. "Neither have you." "Oh, I have," Vivian replied, the faintest smile playing at her lips. "Only my taste has evolved." She let her gaze linger on Annie, her tone honeyed and cruel. "I must say, though, I didn't expect this. You always had refined preferences." Annie stiffened her hand, tightening on her clutch. Henry's voice came out colder than the marble beneath their feet. "Don't." Vivian tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Don't what? Ask questions. Don't speak to her that way." Henry said, calm but lethal. "You've had your say. Now walk away." For a moment, the air between them felt like a standoff. Then Vivian's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Careful, Henry. Not everyone forgives so easily." She turned, her perfume trailing like smoke as she disappeared into the crowd. Annie exhaled shakily. Who was she? He didn't answer right away. His hand brushed hers under the tablecloth, grounding her again. "Vivian Clark, Vice President of Green Holdings. We were engaged once." Annie blinked. "You were engaged years ago. It ended badly." She hesitated. "Do you still care about her?" Henry's eyes lifted to meet hers, steady, clear, almost pained. "No, but she's always known how to leave bruises that don't show." The rest of the evening passed in a haze. Annie mingled as best she could, laughing politely at conversations she barely followed. But beneath it all, her mind kept circling back to Vivian, the way the woman had looked at her, as if she were something temporary. When the gala finally ended, Henry walked her out through the museum's side exit. The night air was cool, the city alive with reflections of neon and moonlight dancing on the surface of the Chicago River. They strolled in silence, the sound of her heels clicking softly against the cobblestone. Annie wrapped her arms around herself, feeling both foolish and exposed. "You didn't have to defend me," she said quietly. Henry glanced at her. "Yes, I did." She gave a short laugh. "I can handle myself, you know. I don't doubt that." He smiled faintly. "But I didn't do it because I thought you couldn't." "Then why?" He stopped walking. The wind caught his hair, his tie, the edges of his expression softening under the city lights. "Because I wanted to." Annie looked up at him, the skyline flickering in her eyes. "You make that sound dangerous." "It is," he said simply. "For both of us." For a long moment they stood at the edge of the river, the world narrowing to the pulse of the water and the silence between them. Then, almost without thinking, she spoke. "I didn't think I'd ever trust anyone again." Henry's voice was low, almost a confession. "And I never thought I'd want someone in my life again." She smiled softly. "Then maybe we're both out of practice." He stepped closer, so close that the warmth of him drowned out the chill in the air. The city's noise faded, the horns, the laughter, even the wind, until there was only the sound of two uneven breaths. "Annie," he murmured, his fingers brushing a loose curl from her cheek. She looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, I don't know what this is." He admitted, his words rough around the edges. "But I don't want it to stop." Neither did she. And then, under the dim glow of the river lights, with the skyline glittering like 1,000 unkept promises above them, Henry Green kissed her. It wasn't rushed or tentative. It was deep, slow, inevitable, the kind of kiss that silenced everything else that spoke in the language of all the things they didn't dare say. For that one heartbeat of forever, the city could have vanished, and neither would have noticed. When they finally pulled apart, the wind carried the faintest whisper across the river. Somewhere miles away, Vivian Clark poured herself another glass of wine, watching the rain slide down her penthouse window. And with a voice as soft as poison, she murmured to the empty room, "Let's see how long your fairy tale lasts, Henry." It started with thunder, a low, distant rumble that rolled across the city like a warning before the storm. By the time Annie opened her eyes, Chicago was drenched in gray. Rain streaked the windows of her small apartment, the sky bruised and heavy. She reached for her phone out of habit and froze. The notifications wouldn't stop. News alerts, texts from coworkers, missed calls from Gloria. Then she saw it. The headline splashed across every major news outlet. CEO Henry Green spotted with employee at charity gala, insider romance, or corporate scandal. Her breath caught. Beneath the headline was a photo, crystal clear, merciless. Henry, in his black tuxedo, looking at her like she was the only person in the room. Her in that black dress, eyes soft smile, unguarded. Frozen in a moment that had felt private, sacred. Now it belonged to the world. The article was worse than the photo. Words like improper relationship power, imbalance, ethical concerns screamed from the screen. Someone had leaked details, her name, her job title, even the floor she worked on. Annie's stomach turned. She dropped the phone as if it had burned her. By noon, she was standing in Gloria Hayes's office, the walls closing in. Gloria wasn't angry, just cold, which was somehow worse. "I told Henry this would happen," she said, pinching the bridge of her nose. "The press is tearing us apart. The board is calling it favoritism. You were promoted too fast, Annie. They're connecting dots that shouldn't exist." Annie's voice trembled. "You know that's not true. I earned my place here." "I know," Gloria said softly. but perception matters more than truth in this world. Annie stared at her boss, the woman who had once been her toughest critic and quietest supporter. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying." Gloria sighed. "You need to take a leave of absence, effective immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. "You're firing me." "No," Gloria said firmly. "I'm trying to protect you. The board wants blood. This gives us time to calm the storm." "Calm the storm?" Annie laughed bitterly. "Gloria, there is no storm without them. Someone leaked that photo. Someone wanted this." Gloria looked away, her silence an answer in itself. Henry's phone call came an hour later. She didn't want to answer, but she did. "Annie." He began, his voice low, strained, the calm CEO tone. "Gone." "I saw the news. Are you okay?" "Do I sound okay?" she snapped, pacing the living room. "They know my name, Henry. They know where I work. I had to clean out my desk today. My son's school called asking questions." "I'll fix it," he said quickly. "I've already talked to PR." The board, she cut him off. "You mean the people who told you I was a liability? The same ones threatening your position right now?" There was silence. Then quietly, "Yes. But I can handle them." "Can you?" she whispered. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've got an empire to save, and I'm just collateral damage." His tone hardened, but not with anger, with something else. "Annie, listen to me. I didn't ask for this to go public. I didn't want any of this to touch you. I swear to you, I will make it right." Her throat tightened. "You promised to help me stand, Henry, not to drag me down with you." "I will fix it," he repeated more fiercely this time. "Trust me." She closed her eyes, tears threatening. "That's what scares me." He wasn't the only one who called that day. By evening, when the rain turned into a downpour, her phone rang again, this time with a voice she hadn't heard in months. Marcus. Her ex-husband's tone was cold, practiced. "You've had quite a week, haven't you?" She swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "Just checking in," he said smoothly. "I read about your little romance. Must be nice dating one of the richest men in Chicago." Her stomach clenched. "This isn't any of your business." "Oh, it's exactly my business," Marcus said, his voice sharpening. "You think the courts will ignore it when they see you parading around with your billionaire boss? You think a judge won't question your stability as a parent?" Her hands trembled. "Don't you dare use Jaden against me." "I don't have to," he said flatly. "Public opinion's already doing that for me. You've made yourself quite the headline, Annie. The kind of woman who can't keep her personal and professional life separate. I wonder how that'll sound in a custody hearing." The line went dead. For a moment, Annie stood frozen, staring at the dark window. Then the tears came, silent, hot, relentless. She pressed her hand to her mouth, trying to keep from breaking apart. Outside, the storm hit its peak. Wind howled through the alleyways. Rain lashed against the windows in violent rhythm. The city lights blurred into streaks of silver and gold through the glass. Annie sat on the floor by the window, her laptop open to the article that had upended her life. Every line felt like a wound reopened. Sources close to the company claim the relationship began during a business dinner. Critics question Henry Green's ethics and the professional boundaries within Green Holdings. She shut the laptop, unable to read more. Her reflection stared back at her in the glass, tired, lost someone she didn't recognize. The apartment was quiet, except for the storm. Jaden was asleep in the next room, blissfully unaware of the headlines tearing his mother apart. She rested her head against the windowpane. It was cold, grounding. For the first time in months, she felt small again, like the girl who'd once worked double shifts to keep the lights on. The girl who'd sworn she'd never need saving again. But Henry had saved her, or tried to, and now everything she'd built was cracking beneath the weight of his world. Lightning flashed, illuminating the street below, the rain glinting like shards of glass. For the briefest second, she thought she saw him, Henry, standing across the street. A dark silhouette in the storm collar turned up unmoving, watching. Then thunder rolled again, and he was gone. Maybe it was a trick of the light, or maybe not. Either way, Annie Martin sat there alone, the storm outside mirroring the one inside her, realizing that sometimes love doesn't break your walls. It breaks everything you thought you could protect. It began, not with a headline, but a whisper. Something inside Henry Green. Something sharp and instinctive told him the storm around him wasn't chance. It was orchestrated. So he did what he'd built an empire doing. He followed the money. In the sterile quiet of his penthouse office, overlooking the Chicago River, Henry sat in the glow of multiple monitors, each line of data and transaction history, leading him deeper into the rot. Paparazzi payouts, confidential tip-offs, a private investigator on someone's payroll. Every lead traced back to the same name, the one he'd spent years trying to forget. Vivian Clark. He leaned back in his chair, the city burning in the glass behind him. For a long moment he said nothing. Then softly, as if the words were too tired to carry anger, she really did it. The confrontation wasn't planned. It never is, when fury is the one holding the steering wheel. He walked straight into Vivian's office, without knocking. The glass walls of Green Holdings shimmered around them, trapping the tension like static. Vivian was at her desk, poised as ever, in a white silk blouse and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Henry, she greeted smoothly, as if nothing had changed. "You look terrible. The press can be so cruel, can't they?" He threw a manila folder onto her desk. Photos spilled out, receipts, wire transfers, signed contracts. "Save the performance," he said. His voice was low even, too calm. "You hired the paparazzi. You leaked the story." Vivian's smile didn't falter. "You've been busy. Why?" His tone cut through the air. "You knew this would destroy her." "Destroy her," Vivian repeated, standing now, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. "Henry, don't be dramatic. She was never meant to survive in our world. I simply accelerated the inevitable." His jaw tightened. "You always wanted control, even when you said it was love." She laughed, a sound that used to warm him, now hollow and cold. "Love. Don't pretend you were ever capable of that. You loved the idea of saving people, not loving them. That girl of yours, she's just another project you can feel noble about." "She's nothing like you," he said quietly. Something in her expression cracked, just for an instant. "No," she whispered. "She's not. That's exactly why you'll lose everything for her." "Vivian, you were everything to me once," she snapped, her composure breaking. "And now you'd throw it all away for a waitress with a pretty face and sad eyes. Fine. Let's see how far your empire falls for love." She said the word like poison, and it hit him harder than he wanted to admit. By the next afternoon, the story got worse. This time, it wasn't paparazzi photos. It was an interview. Marcus Lee, Annie's ex-husband, standing outside a courthouse, speaking into a cluster of microphones. "She's manipulating him," Marcus told reporters smoothly. "It's not the first time she's used someone for money. She's doing it again. She's doing it better." The footage spread like wildfire clips, replayed on every network, sound bites, sliced into headlines. "Insider confirms employee exploited CEO Henry Green for financial gain." And behind it all, Vivian Clark was smiling in her corner office, watching her masterpiece unfold. When Annie saw the broadcast, her world tilted. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The betrayal wasn't from the strangers who judged her. It was from someone she'd once trusted to protect her child. She didn't text Henry, didn't call. She just went. The elevator opened with a soft chime. The air inside Green Holdings was cold, sterile humming with the low vibration of wealth and power. But Annie's pulse drowned it all out. Vivian was waiting. Of course she was. Perfect posture, crimson lipstick, that same faint smirk that never seemed to fade. "Well," Vivian said, pouring herself a glass of wine, as if they were two friends catching up. "If it isn't the woman of the hour." Annie stepped forward, her voice trembling but firm. "You paid him." Vivian raised a brow. "Who, Marcus? You paid him to lie." Vivian's smile widened, lazy and cruel. "Oh, Annie, such an ugly word, lie. Let's just say I incentivized him to tell his version of the truth." Annie's eyes glistened. "Why are you doing this? You already have everything. Money, power, respect. What could you possibly gain from destroying me?" Vivian swirled the wine in her glass. "Because you took something I built my entire life around." "You don't mean the company," Annie said quietly. "No." Vivian's gaze sharpened. "I mean him." Annie took a step closer. "You can't control who someone loves, Vivian." "Love," Vivian repeated with a scoff. "That word again. Do you really believe in it? After everything this world has shown you, love is leverage, my dear. It's a story we tell ourselves until someone richer comes along." Annie's voice broke, but not from fear. From something stronger. "Then I feel sorry for you, because you'll never know what it's like to be loved without having to buy it." For the first time, Vivian's mask slipped. Just a flicker, but it was there. Annie turned and walked out, her heels clicking hard against the marble, her body trembling, but her spine straight. She didn't see the small security camera in the corner, the one Henry had installed months ago, the one still blinking red. She didn't see the live feed open on his office monitor, or the way his hands clenched as he watched the confrontation unfold. In his penthouse, the lights of Chicago glimmered coldly beyond the glass. The room was silent except for the rain tapping faintly against the windows. Henry stood there, the glass of bourbon untouched in his hand, watching the playback again. Annie's voice, steady, brave, heartbreakingly honest, echoed through the speakers. "You'll never know what it's like to be loved without having to buy it." The sound of it tore through him, because it wasn't just meant for Vivian, it was meant for him too. His grip tightened on the glass until it shattered, whiskey spilling like blood across the marble floor. The shards glittered at his feet, and for the first time in years, Henry Green, CEO, billionaire survivor, felt something he couldn't contain. Rage, regret, fear, and beneath it all, the realization that the woman he'd tried to protect was now paying the price for every sin he'd buried. Outside, thunder cracked over the skyline. Inside, Henry closed his eyes, the echo of Annie's voice still burning through the static. The war had started, and this time, love wasn't the weapon, truth was. The train of departure announcements echoed faintly through O'Hare International Airport, a rhythm of endings and escape. Annie stood in line at the gate, suitcase in one hand, Jaden's tiny fingers curled in the other. The morning light slanted through the high glass walls, soft and gold, but she couldn't feel its warmth. Her chest was a hollow ache that even the promise of going home couldn't fill. Atlanta waited for her, the familiarity, the small apartment she could afford, the life she'd almost escaped. She told herself she was doing the right thing, for Jaden, for peace, for survival. But when she looked down at her phone, the world shifted again. The headline took her breath away. Henry Green resigns, as CEO of Green Holdings. Beneath it, a smaller line of text scrolled slowly across the screen. I choose love, not power. Her thumb hovered over the screen. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. People around her moved, boarding passes scanned, lives continuing. But Annie just stood there, the words replaying in her head like an impossible echo. Henry walking away from everything he'd built, the empire he'd bled for her. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She could almost hear his voice again, low, steady, too calm for the chaos it always carried. Trust me. She had tried, and it had nearly destroyed them both. Still, some part of her stubborn, foolish, desperately human couldn't stay still. Mommy Jaden tugged on her hand. "We're not going." She knelt down, brushing his curls gently. "We will, baby. Just give Mommy a second." Then she turned her heart, already knowing what her mind hadn't caught up to yet. Outside, the morning air bit cold against her skin. The wind swept across the terminal bridge, carrying the faint scent of jet fuel and rain. And then she saw him. Henry Green without his armor. No bodyguards, no tailored suit, no headlines or flashing cameras. Just a man standing there, in the open sleeves, rolled eyes, tired but alive. He looked like someone who had finally stopped running. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then slowly she walked toward him. "You shouldn't be here," she said softly, stopping a few feet away. He smiled faintly. "That's exactly what Vivian said." Her chest tightened. "It's true, isn't it? You really stepped down." "I did." His voice was calm, but the tremor beneath it was raw. I handed her the title, the board, the tower, everything she ever wanted. "Why?" "Because I finally understood something," he said. "Power isn't control. It's what you give up when you forget who you're fighting for." Annie shook her head, tears stinging. "You didn't have to do that for me." "I didn't do it for you," he said quietly. "I did it because of you. Because you reminded me what mattered before I sold my soul to boardrooms and bottom lines." She swallowed hard, looking away toward the runway where planes were lifting into the golden horizon. "You don't even know if I'll forgive you. I'm not asking for forgiveness." His steps closed the distance between them. "I'm asking for a chance to stand beside you, not above you, not ahead of you, just beside you." She met his gaze, then searching for the man she thought she'd lost in the noise of money and mistakes. And for the first time, she didn't see the billionaire. She saw Henry, the boy from a trailer park, the man who'd carried too many ghosts and finally decided to set them down. "You gave up everything," she whispered. "The company, the power, the life you built." He smiled, small and almost sad. "I've lost everything before, Annie. My mother, my peace, my humanity. I know how to rebuild. But losing you..." His voice broke rough around the edges. "That's the one thing I can't survive again." Her heart twisted. For weeks she'd fought the urge to believe him, to believe in them. Now, watching him standing in the cold without his armor, she realized he'd already made the choice she was too afraid to make. "You really mean it, don't you?" she said softly. "All of it." He reached for her hand, hesitant, almost reverent, and when his fingers brushed hers, it was like something in the universe realigned. "I don't want to be your savior, Annie," he said. "I just want to walk through whatever comes next with you." She smiled through her tears. "You sound like a man who finally learned what love is." He leaned forward, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead, the kind that didn't demand, didn't promise forever, just was. Maybe I finally did. The light shifted then. The first streaks of sunrise, broke through the gray spilling gold over the glass terminal, painting their silhouettes against the horizon. The air shimmered with that fragile magic that only happens when night gives up its hold on the world. They stood there framed by the morning, her son watching from the window, a small smile spreading across his face because even at 6, he understood something simple and true. That sometimes love really does find its way back. From somewhere nearby, the metallic click of a camera shutter broke the quiet. Annie turned just in time to see a reporter lower his lens. Henry didn't flinch. He just turned, slipped his hand into Annie's, and said with a small, steady smile, "Make sure you write the truth this time, will you?" The reporter blinked, caught off guard. But Henry was already walking away, the woman he loved and her child beside him, the light of dawn stretching ahead. Behind them, the monitors in the terminal still flashed his resignation statement, but the world outside was already rewriting the story. Not one about a fallen CEO or a scandalous affair, but about a man who chose to be human again and the woman who made him remember how. And as the sun rose fully over the runways, painting everything in warmth and promise, it felt like the city itself exhaled. The storm had finally passed, and in its place came morning.